Dr. William Thierfelder holds a PhD in English that has taught a variety of arts and humanities courses over a 3-decade career at several New York and Long Island universities and colleges. After retiring from teaching in 2010, he now devotes his energy to being an artist, photographer, writer, lecturer, and museum docent. He currently resides in Portland, Oregon, and in fact is joining us today from Portland, Oregon. And we are so glad to welcome him back today to help us celebrate the significant contributions that African Americans have made and are making to the exploration of space and the NASA space program. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Bill Thierfelder. Take it away, Bill.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Jeff. And welcome everyone to today's program. I hope everyone is safe and well. So today I'm trying to squeeze 3 centuries of material into a very short program. And of course, that's impossible, of course. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, which is makingwings.net. It's one word, makingwings.net. And if you go there, you'll get that page. There's me at the museum. And if you go to library program extras, you can just click on African Americans space, and you'll be brought to a page that corresponds to today's program. And I give there suggested reading, articles, videos, background, etc. So there's a lot of material on that page. So I really ask you to visit if you'd like. You will find lots of great material that can be a good adjunct to what we're doing today. And one of the things that you will find on the website are recommended books and viewing. Now, on this page, these are 3 books I'd like to recommend. Now, as you can see, they're all older. They're all before 2001 in the 1990s. So they're older, but they really contain some valuable source material if you want to get a sense of what it was like to be a Black American trying to break into the aerospace world. They had a dream. Over there on your left, in the middle, black stars in orbit, and on your right, distinguished African Americans in aviation and space science. These are all 3 really good places to start your exploration. They contain things that some later books actually don't include, so they're a good start. Now, 2 more recent books are superb. We Could Not Fail, which focuses on the men, and the best-selling Hidden Figures, which focuses on the women, tell how NASA tried to integrate America's space program. If you haven't seen the Oscar-nominated film version of Hidden Figures, please do so. I also want to mention that there's a young adult version of Hidden Figures that would be perfect for a junior high or high school reader. So it exists in 2 versions. And if you go to the bookstore and you decide to get it, or you want to buy it online, or you go to the library, make sure that you know which version you're reading. They're pretty similar, but the one for young adults is more user-friendly for a younger reader. And if you have really young readers in your household or in your family, the Women in Science and Technology series from the Discovery Library, they're affiliated with the Discovery Channel, has a number of terrific titles. I've given you 3 here that are very relevant to today's Black History Month program. And these are also listed on my website. I'd like to start with just a little bit of current events. As the Biden-Harris administration settles in, it's making some important personnel changes to NASA, the government agency that's responsible for our space program. A hint at the diversity the administration wishes to see came when President Biden chose 8 people to head up the NASA transition team. And among the people chosen were 2 outstanding Black women, Dr. Jediah Eisler, and who's from Dartmouth, and Dr. Shannon Valley of Georgia Tech. So this is really quite remarkable stuff, and it kind of changes, no pun intended, the complexion of NASA. So stay tuned. Now, what I'm trying to do today is briefly introduce you to 20 people who were and are remarkable men and women. Now, I admit this will be a whirlwind tour, and there are far more than these 20 astronauts, trailblazers, or astronomers that we could talk about. But I wanted you to get a sense of the importance that these particular people had. Hopefully, if some of these names are new to you, you'll be inspired by their stories and do your own research, both on them and some of the others that I've added to my website. My website actually has additional, I think I have 27 people on the website. So let's dive in. So first, I want to look at 5 African-American astronomers who explored space through their telescopes. And first up is Benjamin Banneker, who lived from the colonial period to the beginnings of our nation after the Revolutionary War. He was a free Black man living in Maryland who taught himself math and astronomy at a time when most Black people, free or slaves, weren't even allowed to read or write, let alone learn math and the sciences. His many interests were wide-ranging. His math skills were put to use when he became one of the chief surveyors of what would become Washington, D.C. He was also a melitologist, a scientist who studies bees. And because he owned a farm near Baltimore, he was also very interested in the effect of locusts on his crops. He produced several articles on that topic as well. He also designed and constructed the entire irrigation system for his farm. And if that weren't enough, he built precision clocks. Put simply, he was a polymath. But Banneker's claim to fame with the public was the remarkable almanac that he produced between 1792 and 1797. And it helped to reinforce his nickname within both the Black and white community in his time. He was called the Sable Genius. While he wrote opinion articles, literary reviews, and medical reports, these almanacs were most important for their astronomical contributions. They included his own calculations about eclipses, the location of planets in the night sky, as well as extensive star charts. He also produced exceedingly accurate tide charts that the local Chesapeake Baymen found invaluable. Fortunately, today, you can go to your local library or to a bookstore or do a Google search or go to Amazon, and you can find numerous books about Banneker, especially books written for young people. And I've given you some here on your screen. And for those who collect stamps, a 1980 issue shown in the center of your screen declares that, quote, the Sable Genius was the first Black man named to a presidential commission, unquote. Bottom line, this was a Renaissance man of the first order, and quite remarkably, completely self-taught. Now I'm going to move forward a couple centuries. Next up, we have Walter Mcafee, who was one of the first Black men to earn a master's degree in engineering from Ohio State University. With his degree in hand, he joined the Army Signal Corps in 1942 as an engineer at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. There he became part of Project Diana, which was a revolutionary program that attempted to use radio signals to determine the Earth's distance from the moon, something that had only been guessed at, but never accurately determined. I find that fascinating, isn't it? That it took until the late 1940s to even know how far the moon was away from the Earth. Well, in 1946, his team successfully received the echoing signals between the Earth and the moon, and we finally found out how far away the moon was. And those were the first steps towards making a trip to the moon possible, because now we did know the exact distance and could proceed with pinpoint accuracy. Mcafee took a break from his astronomical work and earned a PhD in physics in 1949. Again, one of the first Black Americans to do so. And he did his work with Hans Bethe on nuclear collisions. Now, Bethe would go on to win a Nobel Prize in nuclear physics in 1967. Mcafee decided to return to his work at the labs at Fort Monmouth. All totaled, he served the labs for 42 years. After his death, in honor of his wonderful work, the government created the Mcafee Center at the fort, which you see on the left side of your screen. His work in astronomy and nuclear physics was important, but perhaps even more important was the fact that his career opened doors for other Black scientists going into an almost exclusively white man's realm. Next up, Derrick Pitts. Derrick Pitts has earned a name for himself as the chief astronomer and planetarium director at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Indeed, he's overseen the planetarium's programs and exhibits for over 2 decades. I've listed a few other accomplishments on your screen. He's the host of the Sky Tonight Planetarium show, the original director of the museum's IMAX theater. He was the Institute's vice president for a number of years, and the chief administrator during the planetarium's renovation. If you ever are in Philadelphia, it's a great planetarium. And I love the Institute's publicity photo of him on your lower left. It just captures his exuberant personality. The photos on your screen show Dr. Pitts in action. He's a born educator and a real people person, which is why he was asked to host a radio show on local station WHYY. I love that, the Y station. He served as America's official spokesperson for the International Year of Astronomy, was named a NASA ambassador, and is a regular guest on talk shows and news broadcasts on CNN and MSNBC. And just the other night, I saw him. Just this week, he spoke about the Perseverance rover on PBS's weekly science show, Nova. So there he was. And person I live with said, "Oh, you're going to talk about him." Yeah, so there he was, right on TV just this past Tuesday evening. Now, Dr. Pitts' equally ebullient counterpart is Neil deGrasse Tyson, director of the Hayden Planetarium and head of the astrophysics department at my museum, the American Museum of Natural History, where I'm a docent. I can speak firsthand about Dr. Tyson's perpetually outgoing personality. In fact, in the hallways, he loves to make fun of my ties, but that's another topic for another day. In addition to his museum work, he's also a best-selling author. One of those books, The Pluto Files, recounts something he's continually razzed about by astronomy buffs and by the museum staff. He was one of the chief voices that saw to the demotion of Pluto from Planet 9 to just one of the thousands of other so-called dwarf planets. He takes all the boos and hisses with a smile, and it's all in good fun. As you can see, I've packed your screen with other awards and recognitions. A number of government commissions, a public service medal, the TV host for Science Now and Star Talk, and since 2014, the host of the magnificent reboot of Carl Sagan's Cosmos series on the National Geographic Channel. Like Derrick Pitts, he's a person who lives and breathes the world of space. Now, I've been presenting these astronomers in chronological order by birth date. Sadly, the most recently born, Dr. Beth Brown, see her on the screen, is also someone who passed away at a very young age. Truly a tremendous loss to the field of astronomy. She studied at Howard University and went on to become the first African-American woman to earn a degree in astronomy from the University of Michigan. Her work about elliptical galaxies remains groundbreaking. Now, what do we mean by an elliptical galaxy? Elliptical galaxies are thought to be the result of two spiral galaxies merging. The photo at the top of your screen, taken by the Hubble telescope, I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit, they can show you the difference. When two of those spiral galaxies, you see them on the left, collide, the hundreds of billions of stars in each merge together and form one galaxy, often elliptical in shape, which means oval shaped, with a super massive black hole in the center, and that's over at your right. Well, Beth Brown became a pioneer in the study and understanding of these galaxies. Her work led to her prominent positions at NASA's Goddard Flight Center in Maryland, where, at the time of her death from a pulmonary embolism, she was only in her 30s, she had just been appointed as their assistant director of science communications and higher education. She was a natural in front of the camera and in front of the classroom, and her loss was deeply, deeply felt. But Beth Brown and the other astronomers we've just looked at have paved the way for new generations of African Americans, both men and women, in the sciences. Well, if astronomers tell us about space, right, then the next men and women helped to make exploration of that space possible. Before you could send a man or a woman to the moon or send a rover like Perseverance to Mars, you need to have mathematicians, engineers, designers. Here are 5 of those trailblazers. As we look at Dorothy Vaughn, we have to remind ourselves that well into the 20th century, and in some circles even today, Blacks in the sciences had to prove that they were as intelligent as other groups because there were and still are too many stereotypes, such as an Asian boy or girl who excels in science and math is considered normal, such as a white person with a European heritage who becomes a rocket scientist is unsurprising. But when a Black person, especially a Black woman like Dorothy Johnson Vaughan or Mary Jackson or Katherine Johnson excel, well, somehow that becomes newsworthy and unexpected. By the way, that's not just an American phenomenon. You can find that kind of built-in prejudice and stereotyping in many European countries, as well as several English-speaking Commonwealth nations. Just ask an Aboriginal person in Australia what it's like, and he or she will give you an earful. So it was really trailblazing when NASA hired Dorothy Vaughn as a mathematician, also known as a human computer, in 1958. She would go on to become the first African-American supervisor at the Langley Center in Virginia. Dorothy would eventually go on to teach computer languages like Fortran and become the lead supervisor of the entire division of analysis and computation at Langley. Dorothy was joined at Langley by another brilliant mind, Mary Winston Jackson. Like Vaughan, Jackson was also hired as a human computer, but she really broke the mold at Langley when she went on to study engineering, much to the disquiet of her white male classmates, and in 1958 became NASA's first Black female aerospace engineer, groundbreaking for both women and African Americans. By the early 1980s, after 34 years at Langley, Jackson became the most senior engineer at the facility. In this same period, NASA made her the senior manager of not only the Federal Women's program in their Office of Equal Opportunity, but the manager of their affirmative action program. She spent her last years at NASA working tirelessly to promote the hiring and promotion of women in science, engineering, and math. She retired in 1985. Probably the most famous of the Langley human computers was Katherine Johnson, who passed away just this last February 24th at the tender age of 101. Oh, so we're almost at the year anniversary today of her passing. She was 101 years old when she passed, sharp-minded until the day she died. Almost immediately after being hired, her legendary skills at celestial navigation made her an important asset. During her 35 years with NASA, she calculated trajectories, launch windows, and emergency backup returns for Project Mercury, including those of Alan Shepard, and most famously, John Glenn, who demanded that she be the one to determine the return flight of his Friendship 7 vehicle. Her calculations were also at the heart of the successful moon landing of Apollo 11 in July of 1969. And she oversaw the launchings and landings of many of the early space shuttle flights. Hello. There we go. She also became involved with early missions to Mars like Viking. And in her quote unquote spare time, she co-authored 26 scientific papers. Simply put, her work made many of the most successful space flights possible. As a result, in 2015, President Obama awarded her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You see her receiving that award in the bottom center of your screen, right next to the fabulous Annie Leibovitz photo that appeared on the front cover of Vanity Fair magazine in 2016, her 98th birthday. We should all look so good at 98. God bless, right? And it was in that same year, the new Computer and Research Center at Langley was named the Katherine Johnson Computational Research Facility. And you see a picture of that on the left of your screen. 2016 was also the year that the story of Vaughan, Jackson, and Johnson hit the big screens in the Oscar-nominated film version of that book I recommended, Hidden Figures. I particularly love the photo at the bottom center of your screen showing Johnson with Janelle Monáe, Octavia Spencer, and Taraji Henson at the February 2017 Oscars. All of those smiles are ones of happiness. And again, if you haven't seen this film, you know, run, don't walk to get it. It's really a wonderful, wonderful film. And the book too, quite wonderful. Now, one of the other trailblazers was Julius Montgomery, who ended up being the first Black person hired at NASA's Cape Canaveral facility who wasn't a janitor. He passed away just 4 weeks before Katherine Johnson in January of 2020 at the age of 90. I guess working in the space industry can actually be good for your health. Montgomery, who received his BA from the Tuskegee Institute and served in the Air Force, was hired by RCA in 1956 to work at the development lab at Cape Canaveral as a radio telescope operator. Now, despite his expertise as a range rat, an expert in radar, telemetry, and missile tracking, Montgomery found that most of his all-white colleagues refused to shake his hand or even to speak to him. Undaunted by the bigoted snubs of his colleagues, Montgomery persisted and became the first African American to desegregate and then graduate from Brevard Engineering College in 1961. The school, located in Melbourne, Florida, is now known as the Florida Institute of Technology, and began as a night school for NASA workers. The school is now well regarded. It's a well-regarded college, and every year it presents a Julius Montgomery Pioneer Award. And you can see the college at the top of the screen. In addition to his work at NASA, Montgomery also became the first Black person elected to the City Council of Melbourne, Florida. So not only in the space industry, but in his own community, Julius Montgomery became a trailblazer. Now, as a sidebar, it's important to note that without the aid of white, mostly male allies within the scientific community and in government, none of these trailblazers would have had much of a chance breaking into a bastion of white privilege. So who would have thought that one of the chief motivators for desegregation at NASA would have been an ex-Nazi rocket scientist? But he was. Wernher von Braun, scooped up by the United States at the end of the Second World War, became not only NASA's leading engineer and spokesperson, but its most vigorous supporter of human rights and equality. Von Braun took President Kennedy's affirmative action initiatives and put them into practice at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. You can see the picture in your lower right, space capital of the universe, Huntsville, Alabama. Well, that's where he was director. Much to the chagrin of Governor George Wallace during the 1960s, you may remember him as a fiercely bigoted person who supported segregation lock, stock, and barrel. Much to the chagrin of Governor Wallace, von Braun made sure that NASA's Huntsville operations hired Black men and women in a variety of positions in computer technology and engineering. He also created grants at several historically Black colleges and universities to bring engineers into NASA, not just at Huntsville, but in NASA's other operational headquarters. And just as another quick side note, here are those 20 centers. And as I say, the number has grown to 20 over the years. Some are world renowned. The Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, that is. The Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California. Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. And of course, the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Some facilities are less well known, like the NASA Safety Center in Cleveland, Ohio, or the Plumbrook Station in Sandusky, Ohio. But what they all have in common is NASA's commitment to equal opportunity regardless of race, color, creed, or sexual orientation. And it's thanks to unlikely people like Wernher von Braun back in the 1950s and 60s that many of our trailblazers had a chance to trailblaze. Which brings us to our last trailblazer, George Carruthers. George Carruthers was, thanks to NASA's policies, he was able to apply his nuclear and aeronautical engineering degrees to great use by designing the first moon-based observatory used on Apollo 16 in 1972. Now, I put on your screen various images of that tiny lab. One of its chief purposes was the study of far distant stars, as well as the planets in our solar system. Since the moon has no atmosphere, the images and data collected there were much better than those that could be collected on Earth with its 7-mile deep, often murky atmosphere. Remember, this is in the time well before the Hubble Space Telescope. So to have this little moon lab, this little observatory on the moon was really, it was trailblazing. So thank you, Dr. Carruthers. After the Apollo program ended, Carruthers helped create a program called the Science and Engineers Apprentice Program, which allows high school students to spend full summer internships working with scientists at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. During the space shuttle era in 1991, Dr. Carruthers invented a specialized camera that was used on shuttle missions. And I've put a picture of it on the right side of your screen. All of this scientific and educational productivity was rewarded when President Obama bestowed the National Medal of Technology and Innovation in February of 2013, a moment captured on the left of your screen. Sadly, Dr. Carruthers was another of the great trailblazers who left us in 2020. It was not a good year. He passed away the day after Christmas of dementia in a Washington hospital, a very tragic end to a brilliant, brilliant life. But we remember Dr. Carruthers and our other trailblazers, what they represent. Though they are no longer with us, they stand as powerful reminders of where we once were as a nation, of how far we've come, and of how far we still have to go. So now that we've met some of the important astronomers and trailblazers, let's take a very brief look at 10 of NASA's African American astronauts. And I'm just going to take a swig of water here. The whistle is wetted and I'm ready. So here's something that's maybe a little disturbing. To date, NASA has selected 350 astronaut candidates to fly on its increasingly challenging missions to explore space. During the last application period, between March 2nd and March 31st of last year, of 2020, more than 12,000 people applied to be an astronaut. The Astronaut Selection Committee is now in the process of reviewing those applications, and NASA expects to announce its selections in mid-2021. Probably fewer than a dozen or so will actually make the final cut. But as of today, only 22 African Americans have been chosen, a number that is expected to be increased when NASA announces its 2021 class. 14 astronauts have been in space, 7 have never flown, and 1 never moved beyond candidate status. Many social critics see this as an important discrepancy. Whereas NASA has been in the vanguard of hiring remarkable Black scientists, engineers, and administrators, they haven't been nearly as far-sighted when choosing future astronauts. Again, there's hope that the new NASA leadership will rectify that later this year when they create the class of 2021, a class that will be more representative of the American talent pool. Now, it's at this point I'm going to put in a plug for a documentary that I recently saw, and it's terrific. It's on the Smithsonian Channel. You'll find the link on my website. If you also, depending on your cable provider, you can just say Smithsonian Channel, and you can say Black in Space, and this will come up. It's called Black in Space, the documentary, and it's about 50 minutes. It's a terrific introduction, not only to the material we're talking about today, but also to another aspect of our topic, one that we really don't have enough time to explore today, namely how racism fit into the overall scope of the space race between America and the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s. What this documentary will show you is that the endemic racism in America that was experienced by the astronomers, trailblazers, and especially the astronauts that we're looking at today was also part of a larger international picture, a racism that the Soviet Union loved to point out and exploit at every turn. It's really a fascinating 50-minute documentary. So Black and White in Space. Please check it out. It is terrific. And one of the people that you'll see discussed in that Smithsonian program is Ed Dwight, who's still going strong at 87 years young. The Kennedy administration chose him as the first African-American astronaut candidate or trainee in 1961. He was a very strong candidate with a stellar Air Force career and an engineering degree from Arizona State University. His selection made headlines around the world, and he appeared on the covers of numerous black news magazines, including Ebony, Jet, and as you can see over here on the right of your screen, Sepia magazine. Unfortunately, during his training at Edwards Air Force Base, he endured rampant discrimination, especially from the head of the program, Chuck Yeager, who might have been jealous of all the attention Dwight was getting. That's certainly one theory. Yeager was famous for being the first pilot to break the sound barrier, and Dwight was stealing his spotlight. He was saying things, this came out in this documentary that I watched, this Black in Space. He actually said that Dwight was failing his classes, and he wasn't. So there was just a lot of stuff. There was a lot of animosity and tension between Yeager and Dwight. So after the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, government officials moved him to a German military base where he was assigned to what he was soon to find out was a non-existent test pilot program. Ultimately, Yeager and others didn't recommend him, despite Dwight's record, and he was not included in the first class of all white astronauts. Frustrated, Dwight finally resigned from the Air Force in 1966. Now, after all of those experiences, Dwight needed to refocus. So he followed his other great passion, art. In fact, if you Google the name Ed Dwight today, you'll see him not listed as a former astronaut, but as an American sculptor. Indeed, after receiving his BFA from the University of Denver in 1977, he became a full-time sculptor, creating highly regarded, prize-winning pieces, primarily art for public spaces that focus on the Black experience and civil rights activists, such as Rosa Parks and the conductors on the Underground Railroad. Now, I put some of that work on your screen, and as you can see, they're really quite beautiful pieces. So America's potential first Black astronaut found himself pushed out. Fortunately, he had a remarkable second act that focuses in many ways on the very racism he himself experienced. By 1967, the atmosphere around the country had changed a little bit at least, and NASA, which had been publicly challenged by the mishandling of the Ed Dwight case, chose Robert Lawrence for its astronaut training program. Like Dwight, he was an Air Force officer, and they, in conjunction with NASA, selected him for its proposed manned orbital lab. So NASA and the Air Force were both going to do this manned orbital lab, the MOLE. And it would have made him the first Black astronaut. For NASA and the Air Force, he flew many experimental aircraft that explored the upper reaches of the atmosphere. And NASA would later say that the data they were able to collect from Lawrence's many missions, quote, contributed greatly to the development of the space shuttle, unquote. Unfortunately, our first official Black astronaut was killed in the crash of an F-104 starfighter in the same year he'd been chosen. Again, showing you how dangerous all of this training and how dangerous space travel can be. NASA confirmed that had he lived, he would have become one of the original group of 7, meaning he would have probably flown in one of the Mercury or Gemini flights. And as I said, sadly, his death illustrates something we all know, that space exploration can be very dangerous and even fatal undertaking. It takes men and women of real courage to go through the program and then to take that leap into space on top of a flaming tube of volatile liquid propellants. Our next astronaut, Ronald Mcnair, who held a doctorate in physics from NIT, as well as a 5th degree belt in karate, was also a very accomplished jazz saxophonist. Chosen for the class of 1978, McNair flew his first space shuttle mission in 1984 as a transport system specialist. And on that particular mission, when he was not performing his scientific work, he played his saxophone to the delight of onlookers from Earth. And there's a picture in the center of your screen. Not only is he playing, but he's weightless, so he's just floating there in air. I love it. Now that's jazz. To top it off, that mission that he was on, it was 191 hours long, was the first to land at the Kennedy Space Center. But as we saw with Bob Lawrence, attempting to reach space can be a very dangerous undertaking. On his second mission in January of 1986, McNair was one of the 7 astronauts who were killed when the Challenger space shuttle exploded a mere 2 minutes after takeoff. As a response to the tragedy, Congress provided funding for the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program that encourages minorities from low-income families and first-generation college students to pursue graduate studies. This program still thrives, and I encourage you to go to the U.S. Department of Education website to check out the program. The link is on my website. It's really wonderful to see Dr. McNair's legacy continuing, even now, 35 years after that tragedy. Just celebrating his 80th birthday is Fred Gregory, who, like McNair, was chosen for the class of 1978. After flying over 500 missions in Vietnam, Gregory's expertise as a pilot proved invaluable to the shuttle program. Indeed, he piloted 3 different original shuttle spacecrafts. He was the chief pilot in 1985 on a Challenger mission, 7 months before that disaster. He became the first Black man to command a space shuttle mission in 1989 on Discovery. And in 1991, he was the commander on the Atlantis shuttle mission. So he was on 3 different shuttlecraft. Over his career at NASA, Gregory was Associate Administrator for the Office of Safety, Chief of Astronaut Training, NASA's Deputy Administrator, and briefly, in 2005, NASA's Interim Chief Administrator. All firsts for an African American. Despite being retired, Gregory is still very active and is working now with NASA on upcoming manned missions to Mars. Another Vietnam veteran, Guy Bluford, was a member of the class of 1979, the year after he earned his doctorate in aerospace engineering from the Air Force Academy. His great distinction is that he became the first African American to travel into space in 1983, when he was a mission specialist aboard the Challenger. And as you can see from the photo on the left of your screen, his first mission was also the first of those spectacular night launches that later missions would also achieve. Bluford would be on a total of 4 shuttle missions, logging over 600 hours in space. After retiring from NASA in 1993, he went on to become a manager at Northrop Grumman, and since 2002, the president and CEO of Aerospace Technology in Cleveland, Ohio, one of the premier aerospace companies in America. Our next astronaut, a member of the class of 1980, is Charles Bolden. He logged over 680 hours in space on 4 shuttle missions, twice as a commander and twice as a pilot. I've listed on your screen 3 of the highlights of those shuttle experiences. First, and here's a throwback to what we were talking about before about Hubble, he was the man responsible for the deployment of the Hubble Space Telescope in April of 1990. So when you see all those magnificent pictures, thank you, Charles Bolden. He was the person in charge of deploying it. He was also responsible for the first use of the European Space Agency's Space Lab to study Earth's atmosphere in March of 1992. And in 1994, NASA's first joint space shuttle mission with the Russians took place with Bolden as the commander. And perhaps the biggest achievement for Bolden was becoming the first African American to head NASA on a full-time basis. Nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate in 2009, Bolden remained NASA's chief for the 8 years of the Obama administration, resigning on the first day of the Trump administration in 2017, which is a usual practice when there's a new president. As 12th administrator, he oversaw many remarkable projects, including the Juno mission to Jupiter, the Mars Curiosity rover, and the initial phases of the James Webb Space Telescope that will be thousands of times more powerful than the Hubble telescope that he deployed in 1990. And then there's Mae Jemison. Love my Mae. She's just terrific. And those pictures, that's Mae Jemison. She's just a champagne bubble. She's wonderful. If you've ever seen an interview of her, you know what I mean. She's just terrific. Yes, I have a crush, okay? I'm admitting it. So she may be one of the best known of NASA's black astronauts, and that's in part to Star Trek. And more of that in a moment. Mae was a member of the class of 1987. Originally trained as a dancer and a choreographer, Jemison graduated from Cornell University with a doctorate in medicine in 1981. Shortly after her graduation from Cornell, she became an intern at Los Angeles County Medical Center and then went on to become a general practitioner. She then went on to practice medicine with the Peace Corps in Africa. But when she came back from Africa, she applied and she was accepted by NASA as an astronaut, being one of only 15 people accepted out of 2,000 applicants for the 1987 group. Her 1992 flight on the Endeavour made her the first African-American woman to travel in space. Now, here's where the Star Trek connection comes in. It turns out, as a child, Jemison was inspired by the character of Uhura on the original Star Trek series, a role played by Nichelle Nichols, whom you see on the right of your screen. She's remained a lifelong fan of the show and the movies. So much so that when LeVar Burton, who played the role of Geordi on Star Trek The Next Generation, heard about her passion for all things Trek, he saw to it that she could have a cameo on one of the episodes. In 1993, Jemison appeared as Lieutenant Palmer in an episode called Second Chances. In so doing, she became the first real-life astronaut to appear in a Star Trek series. And you can see her on in the middle on your right there in that episode called Second Chances. Since her retirement from NASA, she has remained very active. Among other things, Jemison founded the Dorothy Jemison Foundation for Excellence, naming the foundation in honor of her mother. One of the projects of the foundation is The Earth We Share, a science camp for students aged 12 to 16. She's also a public speaker for private and public groups to promote science, technology, and the need for better medicine and treatments in third world countries. Jemison is currently the CEO of the 100-year Starship project, which is a joint effort of NASA and DARPA. DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So it's a joint effort of NASA and DARPA. Its purpose is to create viable business plans that can foster the research and the technology needed for interstellar travel within the next 100 years. Dr. Bernard Harris, another medical doctor. Oh, what? Did I move ahead too fast? Oh, there he is. Okay, got it. Dr. Bernard Harris, another medical doctor like Jemison, joined the NASA team in 1990, and in 2 shuttle missions logged in more than 438 hours in space, traveling over 7.2 million miles. In 1995, on shuttle mission 63, the first one in a newly created Russia-American program that included trips to the Russian space station Mir, Harris became the first African-American astronaut to walk in space. In 1998, he founded the Harris Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Houston, Texas, whose mission is to support programs that empower individuals to recognize their potential and pursue their dreams. And he is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the National Math and Science Initiative. Both organizations focus on minorities and others who are economically and or socially disadvantaged. You can see the pictures on your screen. Dr. Harris is also the author of a wonderful, wonderful memoir pictured over on the left of your screen. It's about his walk in space and his years in NASA, called Dreamwalker, a journey of achievement and inspiration. Now, speaking of inspirations, here's another, Leland Melvin. Now, one of the things you've probably noticed with most of the astronauts, trailblazers, and astronomers that we've seen today is a very wide variety of interests, right? Their focus may be on the stars, but their lives and careers are enriched by many other things, farming, jazz, choreography, the list goes on. Well, Leland Melvin is no different. As the details on the left of your screen show, long before Melvin entered the NASA class of 1998, he was a college professor, well, he is today. He was a college and professional, I meant to say professional, a college and professional football player. Unfortunately, that career with the Detroit Lions, the Toronto Argonauts, and the Dallas Cowboys was cut short by serious reoccurring hamstring injuries. Despite the short-lived career, it's still a passion of his. And for those of us, like me, who are football fans, it's always a delight to see him pop up on ESPN or the NFL network as a guest commentator. But here again, we discover another eye-opening dichotomy, one that we've already touched on. By the beginning of the 2020 football season, the NFL reported that 70% of its players were Black. Meanwhile, as of today, NASA has 48 active astronauts consisting of 16 women and 32 men. And of those 48 astronauts, only 4 are Black, or roughly 8%. Jeanette Epps, Victor Glover, Jessica Watkins, and Stephanie Wilson. The percentages for other people of color as well as people of Asian descent are similarly small. In other words, NASA still has a reputation of being very white boy when it comes to its astronauts. So as said, hopefully the incoming class of 2021 will have a different look to it. Meanwhile, back to Leland Melvin. During an early underwater training exercise, he sustained a serious ear injury that doctors feared might have left him deaf. Fortunately, he recovered, and he ended up logging over 600 hours in space during 2 shuttle missions. Since retiring from NASA, Leland has become an inspiring lecturer and, yes, as I said before, an adjunct professor. He also appears on ESPN and Sports Channel as well as science channels. He gives many STEM lectures to a wide range of audiences, not only about his experiences in space, but about his football career in the NFL. For those who are not familiar, STEM is an approach to learning and development that integrates the area of science, S, technology, T, engineering, E, and mathematics, M, STEM. Though through STEM, students develop key skills, including problem solving, creativity, and critical analysis. Leland, with his outgoing personality, and that's fully on display, you can see in the pictures here. I love the one with the with our Sesame Street character here. He's considered by NASA and many other institutions to be one of the most inspiring and influential astronauts of all time. On top of his work as educator, Melvin has published 2 books, Chasing Space, an astronaut's story of grit, grace, and second chances, and Chasing Space, the Young Readers Edition. Both of these books speak very candidly about his being sexually assaulted at the age of 5, his doomed NFL football career, his love for rescue dogs, and his shuttle missions. And a little piece of trivia, if you look in the front cover of his book, Chasing Space, which is on the right of your screen, that's his official NASA photograph. And it was the first, and as far as I know, only time that NASA allowed someone other than the astronaut to appear in the picture. And in this case, his wonderful, wonderful rescue dogs. He loves his rescue dogs. Now, last but not least, here's Jeanette Epps, one of the 4 currently active African-American astronauts. She was selected in 2009 and qualified in 2011. She's one of several astronauts who have participated in NASA's NEMO project, which is an acronym for NASA Extreme Environment Missions Operations. These NEMO missions send groups of astronauts, engineers, and scientists to live in the Aquarius underwater laboratory located 3.5 miles off Key Largo in Florida. You see a picture of it there in the upper right of your screen. It's the world's only undersea research station. They remain in the lab for up to 3 weeks at a time in preparation for future space exploration. Now, in addition to training for NASA, Epps has also done training for the European Space Agency. In 2019, and that's over on the left of your screen, Epps completed the agency's rigorous CAVES training program. CAVES is, thank goodness they use CAVES, because it actually stands for this bulky thing here, Cooperative Adventure for Valuing and Exercising Human Behavior and Performance Skills. Like I said, I'm glad they use CAVES. This extremely demanding program simulates the hazards of exploring unknown terrains, such as those expected to be found on the Moon and Mars. Epps is only the 2nd woman to participate and graduate from the CAVES program, following fellow NASA astronaut Jessica Meyer. But her next great adventure, and that's on your right, will be on the International Space Station. Originally scheduled for an earlier mission to the ISS, NASA announced in August of 2020 that Epps would join the first operational mission of Boeing's Starliner transport vehicle to the International Space Station. Epps will be the first Black woman to be part of an ISS crew. So, there you have them, the courageous men and women who have broken the color barrier in space exploration. They stand beside the remarkable astronomers and the courageous trailblazers. All of them are the men and women who have gone up, up, and away to open the windows and doors of the far-flung reaches of the cosmos around us.